According to the Los Angeles Times, pop star Michael Jackson died this afternoon after being found unconscious at his home. Bill Whitaker is in Los Angeles.
On June 25, 2009, the world stopped. Michael Jackson wasn't breathing when the paramedics reached his home. Within hours, the news no one wanted to believe became impossible to deny. The king of pop was gone, at just 50 years old. But this story isn't only about the death of a legend. It's about what happened in the moments after. How do you react when someone who once seemed larger than life suddenly disappears? What goes through your mind when the person who shaped an entire generation is no longer here? Some of the people closest to him refused to accept it. Some broke down the second they heard the words. There were even reports that one artist collapsed and fainted the moment the news reached them. And the most heartbreaking reaction of all didn't come from a fellow superstar or someone who had known him for decades. It came from an 11-year-old girl. What she said that day still hits harder than almost anything else. Chapter 1. The moment the news broke. It began like any other Thursday in Los Angeles. By early afternoon on June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson was already unresponsive inside his rented mansion in Holmby Hills. A frantic 911 call went out just after 12:20 p.m.
Did anybody witness what happened?
No, just the doctor, sir. The doctor's been the only one here.
Okay, so the doctor see what happened?
Doctor, did you see what happened, sir? Sir, you just, if you can please...
we're on our way.
Paramedics arrived within minutes, found him not breathing, and worked on him for more than 40 minutes before rushing him to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. At the hospital, doctors continued trying to save him for over an hour. At exactly 2:26 p.m., they pronounced him dead.
A team of doctors, including emergency physicians and cardiologists, attempted to resuscitate him for a period of more than 1 hour, and they were unsuccessful.
The first public reports appeared almost immediately. TMZ broke the news online, and within minutes the internet began to buckle under the weight of people searching his name. Google briefly treated the surge like a cyber attack. Twitter slowed, Wikipedia crashed, television networks interrupted regular programming, phones started ringing across the country and then across the world. At first, many people refused to believe it. It felt too sudden, too impossible. The man who had dominated stages, screens, and charts for decades could not simply be gone in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. But as official confirmation spread from UCLA, the denial began to crack. The unthinkable had become real. The king of pop was dead, and the shock that followed would ripple through millions of lives within hours. Chapter 2. The first reactions from those who knew him. The news did not arrive gently. It crashed into ordinary afternoons and ordinary lives, turning people who had once stood beside Michael Jackson into witnesses of something they could not process. Madonna was in London. She was only days away from opening her tour. Michael had been scheduled to perform in the same city, in the same venue, just 1 week later. The timing felt almost cruel. She was in the middle of preparations when the alert came through. At first, the words did not fully register. Then the reality landed. According to those close to the situation that day, the impact was immediate and physical. One of her staff members later described having to step in and steady her as the news sank in.
Then the witch hunt began. And it seemed like one negative story after the other was coming out about Michael. I felt his pain. I know what it's like to walk down the street and feel like the whole world is turned against you.
When she finally spoke about that afternoon, the first emotion she admitted to was not shock or artistic loss, it was guilt. All I could think about in that moment was I had abandoned him, that we had abandoned him, that we had allowed this magnificent creature who once set the world on fire to somehow slip through the cracks. The sentence carried years of complicated history. She remembered the period when the public narrative around Michael had turned sharply against him. The headlines, the judgment, the slow withdrawal of people who had once celebrated him. Madonna knew what it felt like to walk down a street and sense hostility from every direction. She had survived her own version of that fire. But in her view, Michael had been left inside it largely alone. While he tried to rebuild a family and a career, She believed the rest of them had been busy passing judgment. Most had simply turned their backs. Standing in London, preparing to walk onto a stage he would never reach, that realization settled over her with heavy clarity. The coincidence of the shared venue only made the absence sharper. Across the ocean, Smokey Robinson was looking at houses. He was with a real estate broker, walking through properties, when his phone rang. It was his wife. She was crying so hard he could barely understand her. He asked what was wrong. She managed to get the words out. Michael was dead. Michael Jackson. Smokey's reaction was pure denial. What? No, you did not just say that to me. You did not just tell me that Michael Jackson is dead. The shock hit his system like a physical blow. He broke down and cried right there. Later he would describe it as a total shock to his system, the kind of news that makes the ground feel unstable. He had known Michael since the Motown days, when the boy was still a child with a voice too big for his body. The idea that this same person could simply be gone at 50 felt impossible. Smokey kept repeating the name as if saying it differently might reverse the fact. Quincy Jones was 76, Michael was only 50. That single detail refused to settle in his mind. In interviews in the days that followed, Quincy kept returning to the same stunned refrain. I'm 76 years old and he's 50 and he's not with me anymore. Their souls, he said, had to have been connected to create what they created in the 1980s. Off the wall, Thriller, Bad. Music that still played in every corner of the world. He called Michael his little brother, and the loss felt like part of his own soul had been taken with him. Quincy admitted he was in a deep state of denial. He could not process it. The man who had once moved across a stage with cat-like precision, who had worked 4 hours perfecting every gesture, was suddenly gone. Quincy kept saying he missed his little brother. The word sounded less like a statement and more like someone trying to convince himself the absence was real. Whitney Houston had known Michael and the Jackson family for nearly 2 decades. When Oprah later asked her how the death had affected her, Whitney's voice still carried the disbelief.
I thought, it can't be true. No one have I ever met quite like that young man. You know, and to have it in like that.
She remembered the 30th anniversary special they had done together years earlier. She had looked at Michael that night and seen how frail he had become. Then she had looked at herself. The recognition had frightened her. I was getting scared, she said. I was looking at myself going, no, I don't want this to be like this. This can't happen. Not both of us. Michael had been more than a fellow artist to her. He was someone whose struggles mirrored her own in ways that felt too close. The news that he was gone left her devastated, and the denial came first. It simply could not be true. No one she had ever met was quite like that young man. These were not distant celebrities issuing polished statements. These were people who had shared rooms, stages, dinners, and years with Michael Jackson. Madonna carrying the weight of collective abandonment. Smokey Robinson crying in the middle of a real estate appointment. Quincy Jones unable to accept that the younger man had left first. Whitney Houston staring at the possibility that the same darkness that took him might one day reach for her too. The news had arrived on an ordinary Thursday. By the time it reached them, the ordinary had already shattered. Right after those voices came another presence that carried a quieter, more complicated weight. Macaulay Culkin had known Michael since he was still a child. The two had formed one of the most scrutinized friendships in Hollywood, a grown man and a young boy who both understood what it meant to grow up under lights that never turned off. Culkin would later insist their time together was strangely ordinary, endless prank phone calls, silly games, the simple relief of not having to perform, yet the public never stopped questioning it. When Michael died, Culkin did not rush to the cameras. He stayed silent while the world demanded answers. Then, more than 2 months later, he appeared at the private burial at Forest Lawn, sitting among the smallest and most exclusive circle of mourners. Beside him was his then-girlfriend, Mila Kunis. Across the chairs sat Elizabeth Taylor, Lisa Marie Presley, and the Jackson family. As the godfather of Paris Jackson, Culkin was not just another celebrity paying respects. He was saying goodbye to the man who had once been one of the few people who truly understood him, and to a relationship the world had never stopped trying to define. Chapter 3. The Artists Who Carried His Influence. The death of Michael Jackson did not only shatter those who had known him personally, it sent a deep tremor through an entire generation of performers who had grown up studying his every move, every note, every impossible gesture on stage. For them, the loss was both artistic and personal. He had shaped the way they understood performance itself. Beyoncé was in the middle of her I Am World Tour when the news broke. In the days that followed, she chose not to deliver a distant statement. Instead, she turned one of her own songs into a living tribute. On stage, under the lights, she paused the usual flow of the show and spoke directly to the crowd. She recalled the first time she had seen Michael perform and how that moment had planted the dream of becoming an artist. Then she asked the audience to raise their phones, their lighters, their glow sticks, anything that could create light and help her celebrate his life. The arena filled with small points of brightness while she performed. It was not a polished memorial. It was a spontaneous act of gratitude from someone who understood that Michael had opened a door she had walked through. Chris Brown's tribute came almost exactly 1 year later at the 2010 BET Awards. He stepped onto the stage and began recreating Michael's choreography with precision and energy. For several minutes he seemed completely in control, moving through the familiar steps that millions had watched on television and in music videos. Then the music shifted into Man in the Mirror. Something broke. Chris tried to continue singing, but the emotion overwhelmed him. His voice faltered, the polished performer disappeared, and what remained was a young man suddenly face to face with the absence of the artist who had defined so much of what he wanted to become. The moment was raw. It was not planned as a breakdown. It simply happened when the weight of the song and the reality of the loss collided in front of a live audience and millions watching at home. Justin Timberlake spoke about Michael with a mixture of personal memory and artistic awe. He had been fortunate enough to share stages with him and to know him off stage as well. Yet when he reflected on the death, he focused on something larger than individual memories. Michael, he said, had opened the minds of the world. Few artists in history had managed to do that through a single medium of art. Even among that rare group, Justin believed no one had presented a song on stage the way Michael did. The precision, the drama, the complete command of an audience, it was untouchable. Justin struggled to find comparisons. In the end, he settled on a simpler truth. Michael was simply the baddest. The word was not casual slang. It was the only description that felt accurate for someone who had rewritten the rules of what a live performance could be. Usher put the influence into even clearer terms. You can't say that you are an artist in this century and not be influenced by Michael. The statement was almost absolute. For Usher, Michael was not just an inspiration. He was a foundational force. Usher had been lucky enough to meet him, to know him personally, and even to share a stage with him. That closeness made the loss feel sharper. At the same time, he understood that the tragedy extended far beyond the music industry. His thoughts went immediately to Michael's mother and to the children left behind. The artistic debt was enormous, but the human cost was even heavier. Jay-Z approached the moment from a different angle. Standing in front of a crowd, he refused to let the entire conversation remain trapped in sadness. Instead, he turned Michael's death into a hard reminder. "We don't mourn death, we celebrate life," he told the audience. Then he delivered the line that cut deepest. "Don't wait until somebody is gone to tell them you appreciate them." Michael had spent decades giving people moments they would remember for the rest of their lives. The 9 albums that shot into the top 10 after his death were impressive, Jay-Z noted, but they would have been far more meaningful if Michael had been alive to see them. The point was simple and uncomfortable. Recognition that arrives too late is still recognition, but it is also a form of regret. Taken together, these reactions reveal something larger than individual grief. Beyoncé turning a concert into a communal act of light, Chris Brown losing control in the middle of a tribute, Justin Timberlake searching for language big enough to describe what Michael had done to the stage, Usher acknowledging that an entire century of artists stood in his shadow, Jay-Z warning the living not to postpone their gratitude. Michael Jackson had spent his life creating moments that felt larger than ordinary human experience. When he was gone, the artists who followed him were left to confront both the size of that legacy and the sudden emptiness where the man himself had been. Their responses were not uniform. Some were polished, some were broken, some were reflective. All of them, in different ways, admitted the same truth. The standard he set had reshaped what it meant to perform, and no one who came after him could pretend they had not been changed by it. Chapter 4. Inside the Family. While the world reacted with shock and artistic tributes, the people who had grown up with Michael Jackson were living through something far more intimate and unbearable. They were not mourning an icon, they were losing a brother. LaToya Jackson was at home in Los Angeles when the first call came. She had just been talking about the death of Farrah Fawcett and had idly wondered who would be next, the old superstition that celebrities die in threes. Minutes later, her father, Joe, rang. Michael was sick. They had taken him to the hospital. She needed to get there. She got into the car. On the way, she kept calling her mother's assistant, asking the same question over and over. How is he? Is he okay? The assistant would not answer. In the background, she could hear her mother, Catherine. Then Catherine took the phone. What came through this speaker was not a quiet statement. It was a scream. "He's dead!" LaToya nearly crashed the car. Her legs went weak. She could not press the gas pedal properly. She later said her heart felt as if it had stopped. In desperation, she began asking strangers on the street to drive her the rest of the way because she no longer trusted her own body to get her there. She was only a few minutes from the hospital, yet the short distance suddenly felt impossible. When she finally arrived, the scene inside was pure chaos and grief. Catherine was sitting with Michael's 3 children on her lap. Everyone was crying. LaToya looked at her mother, received a silent confirmation, and broke down completely. The public image of Michael Jackson, the global superstar, the king of pop, had no place in that room. What remained was a family that had just lost one of its own. Jermaine Jackson received the news in a similar way. His mother called him crying and said the words no parent should ever have to say, "Michael is dead." Jermaine later tried to describe the sound of her voice in that moment. Hearing a mother say that her child is gone, he explained, is something no one can fully imagine until it happens. The tone itself carried a weight that language could not hold. He rushed across town. As he got closer to UCLA Medical Center, he saw the helicopters already filling the sky. The public chaos was beginning, but inside the hospital, the private reality was waiting. He went first to his mother, trying to console her. Then he asked to see his brother. When he walked into the room, Michael was lying there, lifeless and breathless. Jermaine later said the sight was extremely emotional, yet he forced himself to stay composed. In his mind, the body was only a shell. The spirit, he believed, was still alive. He kissed Michael on the forehead, hugged him, touched him, and spoke quietly, "Michael, I'll never leave you. You'll never leave me." In the days that followed, Jermaine would say something even more revealing. He wished it had been him instead. He had always felt he was Michael's backbone, the one who could say the things Michael could not. The idea that the younger brother had gone first felt wrong on every level. The difference between these reactions and those of fellow artists is stark. Madonna, Quincy, Smokey, and Whitney were grieving a friend, a collaborator, a shared history. The Jackson siblings were grieving the person they had known before the fame, before the stages, before the world claimed him. They had shared bedrooms, arguments, childhood fears, and the long, complicated reality of being a family under impossible pressure. When the news came, it did not arrive as a cultural event. It arrived as the sudden absence of someone they loved. In the hospital rooms and on those frantic phone calls, there were no carefully worded tributes. There were only screams, weak legs, helicopters overhead, and a brother leaning over a still body to say goodbye. That is the private face of a public tragedy. The moment when the king of pop disappeared and only Michael remained, gone. Chapter 5. The most painful moment. 12 days after Michael Jackson died, the world gathered to say goodbye. The public memorial took place at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. Thousands sat inside the arena. Millions more watched from around the globe. The stage was filled with family, friends, and some of the biggest names in music. Speeches were delivered. Songs were performed. Tributes poured out in carefully chosen words. The atmosphere was heavy with both spectacle and genuine sorrow. Near the end of the service, something unexpected happened. An 11-year-old girl stepped toward the microphone. Paris Jackson, Michael's only daughter, had spent most of her young life protected from the full force of public attention. Her father had worked hard to give his children as much normalcy as possible inside an anything but normal existence. The world had rarely heard her voice. Now, standing in front of a global audience still reeling from the loss, she prepared to speak. She was surrounded by family. The moment was not heavily staged. In later years, she would recall that no one had planned for one of the children to address the crowd. The adults looked around, no one moved, so she did. Her voice was small at first. Someone encouraged her to speak up and move closer to the microphone. Then the words came.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
Her voice broke. The sentence dissolved into tears. The vast arena fell into a deep, collective silence. For a few seconds, the noise of the world seemed to stop. There were no applause lines, no soaring musical cues, no polished rhetoric, just a child trying to say the simplest and most impossible thing, that she loved her father and that he was gone. It was not the statement of a fan. It was not the tribute of a fellow artist measuring influence or legacy. It was the raw expression of a little girl who had lost the center of her world. In that moment, the king of pop disappeared. What remained was simply Daddy. The power of those few sentences has endured for years precisely because they stripped everything else away. While adults spoke of genius, cultural impact, and unfinished work, Paris spoke of the daily reality of being loved by him. The contrast was almost unbearable. The same man who had commanded stadiums and rewritten the rules of performance had also been the father who made an 11-year-old feel completely safe and completely seen. In the years that followed, Paris would grow up under the same relentless spotlight that had surrounded her father. She would face her own struggles, her own public scrutiny, and her own complicated path toward understanding the man the world thought it knew. But on that day in the Staples Center, none of that future existed yet. There was only a child at a microphone trying to put love into words before the weight of grief made speech impossible. Michael Jackson spent his entire adult life under the brightest lights the entertainment world could create. Stages, cameras, headlines, and the constant gaze of millions defined his existence. Yet, when he died, the most honest reactions did not come from the machinery of fame. They came from the people who had seen him when the lights were off. Some refused to believe the news. Some collapsed under the suddenness of it. Some carried guilt for having stepped back during his most difficult years. Some are still years later trying to accept that he is gone. Fellow artists spoke of influence, of opened minds, of untouchable performances. Family members confronted the private horror of a mother screaming that her child was dead, of a brother kissing a lifeless forehead and wishing the order of loss had been reversed. And then there was Paris. In a memorial filled with carefully prepared tributes, the moment that silenced the world was not a grand speech. It was two simple sentences from an 11-year-old girl who only wanted to say that her father had been the best she could imagine and that she loved him. That is the detail that lingers. The world called him the king of pop. To her, he was just Daddy. And sometimes the most painful truth is also the most human one. Behind every larger-than-life figure is someone who was, to a child, simply the person who made the world feel safe. When that person is gone, no amount of legend can fill the space they leave behind.